The sun had no mercy that day. It blistered the earth, turning every stone into fire and every shadow into a taunt. Cicadas screamed in the brush. The wind carried no comfort, only dust and the bitter scent of something long dead. Somewhere on that lonely prairie between nothing and more of it, a woman walked barefoot, belly heavy with child, a small girl limping behind her in a tattered blue dress that had once belonged to someone with hope. Josephine Grace Hollis wasn't crying. She had done all her crying on the wagon trail, when the wheels split, when her husband's kin pulled the reins and said this is where you get off, and when they left her standing by a withered cottonwood with one cracked trunk, a battered trunk of her belongings, and a single canteen with more air than water. That was 2 days ago. Or 3. Or maybe time didn't tick out here, it just bled. Her lips were split. Her back throbbed. The baby shifted low, deep, like the body already knew what was coming. But Josephine walked still. She carried her little girl when she had to, set her down when she couldn't. Lottie had stopped speaking sometime that morning. Her cheeks burned. Her shoes were gone. Josephine whispered the Lord's Prayer into the wind, not so much because she believed, but because there was no one else left to talk to. She thought of how it all began. Of the man with soft hands and empty promises. Of the courthouse vows and whispers about her age, her widowed womb. He had smiled big in front of townsfolk, but smaller each day after. When her belly began to show, his family began to frown. That child will be cursed, they said. She's already buried one husband. Best not tempt fate with another. And so, they packed her up, like someone returning a cracked dish. She was 45, too old to fight, too young to die. She had done what women did. Took love as it came. Took shame when it followed. Took silence when it settled in. Now the prairie stretched on. No town. No trail. Only heat and a sky that looked down with indifference. She stopped beneath the cottonwood, the only landmark left. Its bark was split down the middle, scorched by some long-ago lightning. It leaned like an old man too tired to stand. Beneath its arms, there was a pit someone had once dug for shade or water. She sat by its edge. Dust caked her skirts. "Come here, baby," she murmured, voice like dry reeds. Lottie came. She curled against her mother's side and placed a hand on the belly that carried her brother, or sister. Josephine didn't know. Didn't care. She only knew the baby kicked strong. That meant something. Had to. She reached into the trunk for the last piece of hard biscuit. Gave it to Lottie without tasting it herself. Her daughter nibbled like a bird, slow, unsure. Josephine touched her child's cheek. The sweat pooled near the brow, the sunburned freckle above her lip. She kissed it. Just once. "I'm sorry," she said. No one answered. She tried digging then. With a broken tin spoon and fingers cracked and bleeding. Maybe a well lay beneath. Maybe an old trail marker someone forgot. But the ground gave nothing but stone. Midday came. The air shimmered. Lottie whimpered in her sleep. Josephine wrapped the child in what fabric she had, pressed her hand to her own belly and whispered, "Not yet, baby. Hold on." She didn't notice the coyote watching from the ridge. Its eyes were the color of rust. It sat, unmoving, sniffing the heat like it was waiting for permission. It was alone, too. Or maybe not. Josephine didn't care. She laid down beside her daughter. Closed her eyes. The sky spun. Her breath came thin. Her heart beat slow and thick. Maybe this is how it ends, she thought. Not in fire. Not in war. Just quiet and dust and a forgotten name. Time passed. The sun began to bend westward. The sky burned red at the edges, like an old wound flaring up. Josephine stirred once, reached for her daughter, and found her too hot, too still. Fear lanced through the fog of her thoughts. "Lottie," she rasped. The girl groaned but did not wake. Josephine tried to sit up. Her arms shook. Her vision blurred. In the distance, a sound, like hooves. Faint. Then gone. She laid back down. The sound came again. Louder. Rhythmic. Josephine thought it was a dream. or death come on horseback. But then the dust shifted, and she saw him. A figure, tall, slumped in the saddle, the sun behind him so she couldn't see his face. His horse, lean and sweat-slicked, moved slow, cautious. The man pulled back on the reins near the cottonwood. The horse nickered once, sensing something not right. He didn't speak at first, just watched her. She looked up with one eye half shut from swelling. Her lips parted, but no words came. He dismounted, boot heels in dust, spurs silent. He knelt. Up close, he was younger than she expected. Late 20s, maybe. His face was drawn, like a man who hadn't known peace in years. But his eyes, they were kind. She tried to move again, but her strength was gone. "Please," she mouthed, unsure if he could hear. He looked from her to the child, then to her belly. Something changed in his face, a flicker of pain, recognition, duty. He didn't ask what happened. He didn't ask who she was. He simply reached down and lifted the child into his arms, wrapping her in his coat. Then he turned to Josephine. She wanted to speak, to tell him not to waste time. But her head lolled, and the world faded. The last thing she saw was the sky, no longer cruel, but softening. The color of old peaches and bruised apricots. A summer sky trying to remember gentleness. When she woke again, the world smelled of wood smoke. She was lying on a cot made of rawhide and cedar, in a small, dark cabin. A dog barked outside. A curtain stirred. She heard Lottie's breath, shallow but real. A bowl of cool water rested beside her. A hand, his, laid a damp cloth on her brow. Josephine blinked once. He said nothing, but his eyes told her, "You're not dying today." And for the first time in weeks, Josephine Grace Hollis wept, not from pain, but from being seen. When Josephine opened her eyes again, it was not to sun or sky or silence, but the golden flicker of lantern flame dancing along rough-hewn cabin walls. The cot beneath her creaked gently with every breath. She tried to sit up, but her body ached in places too deep for pain alone. Her arms were weak, legs numb, throat raw. The baby within her turned like a restless tide, as if sensing change. Lottie lay on a folded woolen blanket nearby, curled like a kitten in sleep, her cheeks no longer scorched but flushed with fever's tail. A small whimper escaped her lips, and Josephine flinched to rise, but a shadow moved from the far side of the room. He came with quiet steps. That man again, the one who found her by the cottonwood tree. This time she could see his face in full, sun-darkened skin, sharp jaw dusted in a week's worth of stubble, hair tied back with a fraying piece of leather. His eyes, though, held the most, that peculiar blend of grief and steadiness found only in those who had carried too many things alone. He carried a basin and cloth, no words, just work. She tried to speak, but he shook his head softly. "Drink first," he murmured, and his voice was sanded smooth like driftwood, low, steady, and strangely safe. He helped her sip cool water from a tin cup. She coughed once, and then again, and then breathed deeper than she had in days. "You're all right now," he said, setting the cup down. "Your girl too. Fever's breaking." She tried to say thank you, but all that came out was a whisper. He didn't ask who she was, nor what had happened. Just tucked the quilt closer to her shoulders and turned toward the stove. His cabin was small, one room, save for a curtained nook in the corner. A hand-carved rocking chair sat near the hearth. A single shelf bore worn books, some spines cracked from years of rereading. The scent of sage and old pine lingered in the air, earthy and calm. Lottie stirred and reached for her mother with sleep-heavy hands. Josephine gathered her daughter in with aching arms and held her close. Later, when strength returned enough for speech, Josephine asked, "Your name?" He hesitated at first, as if unsure it mattered. Then, simply, "David Thorne." She repeated it in her mind, rolled it around like river stone. She told him hers next, Josephine Grace Hollis, and then silence stretched again, not awkward, just quiet, like something old settling in the walls. Over the next 2 days, strength crept back in like dawn. Slowly, kindly. David brought broth made from bone and root. He fixed a wooden spoon for Lottie, who had begun to talk again, mostly to the dog, a tired hound named Birch who followed her with patient eyes. When Josephine tried to help, to rise, he only gestured her down. "You've done more than enough. Let rest do its work." But Josephine had never been good at resting. She folded what blankets she could, swept corners with a willow broom, cooked eggs one morning, the only thing she could reach while seated. David didn't stop her that time, just watched. On the third evening, a wagon clattered near the porch, and a voice called through the open window. "You talking in strays now, Thorne?" A woman stood outside, short and sharp-eyed, dressed in riding trousers and a faded green blouse. Her white braid swung like a rope behind her. She carried a basket of eggs and tomatoes. David opened the door, and she walked in like she owned the place. "Miss Beatrix," he said, a faint smile tugging at his otherwise solemn face. "Don't you miss me?" "Who's this?" she asked, peering at Josephine. Josephine stood, though she trembled. Beatrix squinted. "You're too thin. You're too pregnant. And you've been left out in that sun, haven't you?" Josephine blinked, unsure how to respond. Beatrix walked up close, her eyes softer now. "Then sit down, honey. You've had a bad run." She set the basket on the table. "He's a good man, this one. Doesn't talk much, but he's honest. Won't hurt you." "I know," Josephine said quietly. Later that night, David sat on the porch sharpening a tool. The air was cooler now. Crickets chirped. Lottie slept inside. Josephine joined him, her arms wrapped around her belly like a shield. He didn't look at her. Just said, "You can stay as long as you need." She swallowed. "I won't impose. You aren't my in-laws. They'll come looking, maybe, when word gets around. Let them come." She turned toward him then. "Why are you doing this?" He was quiet for a long while. The whetstone slowed. "Because once," he said, "someone gave me shelter when I didn't deserve it. Thought I'd repay that forward." She said nothing. Inside, the fire crackled. Outside, the stars came out slowly, like shy things. The next morning, Josephine found Lottie kneeling in the dirt by the chicken coop. David was showing her how to feed them with cracked corn. He held a tin cup low and let the girl scatter seed with a laugh. Josephine leaned in the doorway and watched. Something in her chest ached. It was not pain, not fear. It was beginning. She moved down the steps to join them, bent slow, belly first, and rested on the log beside the coop. David glanced at her only briefly before continuing his soft-spoken lessons. Later that afternoon, Josephine wandered into the garden, a few rows of carrots and onions half-choked with weeds. She pulled up a few by hand, soil cool against her fingers. A soft breeze moved through the trees. A bird sang high in the pine. David joined her with a second trowel. They knelt side by side. "You've been here long?" she asked. 10 years. Since the war. Alone." He nodded. "My wife passed in winter. Long time ago now." "I'm sorry." He shrugged. "Wasn't her fault." They kept digging, side by side, like two people who had always gardened in silence. She told him of her first husband, kind and sickly. Of her second, selfish and afraid. Of the child she carried now, not planned, not celebrated. David didn't judge. He didn't flinch. When she wept, quietly, hands muddy, he didn't speak. He just placed a hand over hers and let it rest there. That night, when the wind rose and the shutters clattered, Josephine stood by the stove and stirred stew while Lottie colored with charcoal on the floor. David carved something at the table. They didn't speak much, but the room felt full. It felt lived in. As they ate, David offered a toast without raising his glass. "To peace," he said, "even if it's borrowed." Josephine smiled. "I'll take borrowed," she said, "so long as it's warm." Later, she sat outside alone beneath the stars. The wind tugged her hair. She could feel the baby kicking, strong and fierce. She pressed a hand to her belly. "We're not done yet," she whispered. Inside, David checked the window, watched her, then turned back toward the cot and laid a quilt over Lottie's small body. And for the first time in a long time, something settled. Not finished, but safe. For now. The days began to take shape, soft as fog rolling in from forgotten hills. Josephine rose earlier now, not from obligation, but because her body stirred in rhythm with the house. The morning held a hush she liked. Before Lottie stirred, before David emerged from his room with sleep-lined eyes and a quiet nod. That hush gave her time to press both hands to her belly, to feel the child growing, turning, claiming space. Sometimes she spoke to the baby in a hush, not with dreams or promises, but simply to say, "I'm still here." By the end of July, the land was beginning to turn. Not cooler, no, the sun still scorched, but there were signs. Shoots of green in forgotten places. The hens laid steadier. Lottie began to sing again. She and David worked the garden together most days. He would crouch low, forearms covered in dirt, sleeves rolled up just past the elbows, silent as ever. Josephine found herself watching him longer than she meant to. The way his hands cradled the base of each carrot before pulling. The care in it. "You treat everything like it might break," she said once, kneeling beside him. He glanced over, brushing hair from his brow. "Things usually do." She hadn't replied. But something inside her softened, slow as thaw. They rebuilt the chicken coop that week. The old planks were warping, and raccoons had broken through the base. David showed her how to set nails without splitting wood, how to brace from the corner. Josephine listened, learned, felt her hands remember old skills she hadn't needed since her first husband. "You talk more now," she said one afternoon, half a smile playing at her mouth. David looked at her, puzzled. "You used to answer in one word. Now it's 2 or 3. He gave her a look like a slow sunrise. "Well," he said, "you're easier to talk to now." And that was the beginning of something neither of them dared name. That evening, Josephine sat on the porch with a basin of water, washing Lottie's feet. The child had spent the day chasing chickens. Wild with laughter, her curls tied up in red ribbon, Miss Beatrix had brought by. David stepped outside with a whittling knife, sat beside Josephine. His shirt was unbuttoned at the throat. His hands moved in that gentle way of his, cutting, shaping. "What are you making?" she asked. "Rocking horse," he said. "For Lottie. Maybe the new one too." Her breath caught a little. She hadn't known he'd begun anything for the baby. When he looked at her, there was no awkwardness in it. Just intention. Plain and true. She nodded, swallowing emotion like bitter tea. The next day brought rain, the first in weeks. It came sudden, spilling out of clouds that had seemed only gray minutes before. Josephine stood by the open door, her fingers grazing the frame, as she watched the dust darken and the smell of wet earth rise like incense. Lottie twirled barefoot under the eaves, arms out wide. David stepped in, hair damp, shirt plastered to his skin. He looked like something carved from memory, earthy, solid, and oddly beautiful. "You all right?" he asked her. She nodded. "Rain makes me feel clean." He set down a basket of cut kindling and moved to stoke the fire. They worked in tandem without thought now. He set the kettle, she found the tin cups. That night, with Lottie asleep and the rain still tapping the windows, Josephine sat beside the hearth while David sanded the toy horse smooth. "I was scared to come here," she said quietly. He didn't answer, just let her speak. "I didn't think I'd make it. I didn't think we mattered enough to be saved." His sanding slowed. "I didn't save you," he said. "You walked through hell and still held that child in your arms. That wasn't me." She stared into the flames. "I was angry too," she whispered. "That he left. That they left. But most of all, I was angry that I wasn't surprised." That made David look at her. "I've seen that kind of pain before," he said. "It doesn't show on the outside, but it stays. Like a splinter under the skin." They were quiet then, but not alone. In the warmth of that cabin, With thunder grumbling like an old man beyond the hills, something shifted. Trust, real trust, is a slow-growing vine. It needs stillness. It needs shadow and light. And it needs hands that don't pull too hard. They built that trust, inch by inch, in how they moved through the cabin. In how they spoke when they didn't have to. In how Lottie fell asleep curled at David's side while he read from a worn book about prairie birds. It was Miss Beatrix who noticed first. She arrived one Sunday morning, straw hat crooked, boots dusty. "You look different," she said, eyes narrowing at Josephine. Josephine raised a brow. "How so?" "Softer. More here. Less running." Josephine only smiled. Later that day, old May, the midwife, came for a check. She poked and prodded with firm hands, muttering half to herself. "This one's strong," she said. "Ready, too. I'd say a week. Maybe less." Josephine went quiet. David, who had been standing near the door, stiffened. "Is that too soon?" "No," old May said. "Just sudden." After the midwife left, Josephine sat on the edge of the bed, staring at her hands. "I'm afraid," she said when David joined her. "Of what?" "Of loving this child and losing it. Of loving this life and having it taken again." He sat beside her, close, but not touching. "I won't lie to you," he said. "Loss finds its way to everyone. But I've learned one thing." She turned to him. "Loving's still worth it. Every time." And then, slowly, she leaned her head to his shoulder. He didn't move. Just let her stay there as the shadows grew long. The next day, trouble returned. 3 men rode up near dusk, one in a black vest with a hawk stare, another squat and sneering, and the third a thin man who clutched papers like they held the world's power. Josephine saw them from the garden and froze. David came out before they could reach the steps. "We're here for the woman," the hawk-eyed one said. "And the child." "You'll turn around now," David replied. "She's married to our kin. This ain't legal. She was left for dead. You forfeited your say." The thin man waved his paper. "We got claims. Her husband's property, unborn included." Josephine stepped forward. "My husband left me in a ditch. I buried my first with my own hands. This child is mine, not yours, not anyone else's." They didn't like that. "Law might say different," said the squat one. "Then the law can ride here and speak to me directly," David said. "Until then, you'll keep your boots off this land." The men exchanged looks, but David didn't flinch. His hand rested easy on the rail. Not near a weapon, but near enough. They rode off, but not far. "They'll come back," Josephine said that night. David nodded. "We'll be ready." Later, as the moon carved silver lines across the floor, Josephine stood beside Lottie's bed. Watched her daughter sleep, cheeks pink, hair tangled in curls. She moved to the window, belly full, heart heavier. David stood at the porch rail, watching the horizon. She joined him, her shawl wrapped loose. "They'll try something," she said. He nodded. "I know. But I'm not scared," she added. He turned then, looked at her like she was a miracle made flesh. "I am," he said softly. "But not for me." The moon shone between them. A long silence. And then, like something ancient and brave, Josephine reached for his hand. He took it, calloused fingers warm. Inside, the baby kicked. And outside, the wind shifted. Things were changing. Not all things grow in perfect soil. Some need dust, and drought, and time. The wind came before the light changed, before the clouds pulled together like the slow breath of something ancient waking. Dust curled off the earth in long, searching fingers. The chickens went silent. Even Birch, the old dog who barked at butterflies and passing birds, went still beneath the porch. Josephine stood by the window, hand pressed to her belly, her other arm wrapped around Lottie, whose eyes mirrored the sky. The pain had begun before dawn, a low pull in her back, then tightness, sharper now, building in waves. But she hadn't said anything. Not yet. Not while the world outside held its breath. David stood at the edge of the yard, watching the road. His figure, tall and steady against the silver grass, seemed etched into the earth. Josephine had never trusted a man's silence until David Thorne. Now, it steadied her more than scripture. When he turned back to the house, the look in his eyes said everything. They were coming. Josephine moved slowly, gathering Lottie's shoes, the berthcloths, the basin. She breathed through the pain. She knew what was inside her, and what was out there. And both were coming now. At once. David stepped into the house and closed the door gently, as if it were any other day. "They've got 4 riders," he said quietly. 2 I've seen before. 2 new. They've stopped by the river. Scouting. Waiting. Josephine sat down, closed her eyes. "They're not going away, are they?" "No." The pain returned. This time it gripped deeper. She exhaled slow. "Then we don't go either." Miss Beatrix arrived by midday, dust rising behind her wagon like smoke. Old May was with her, face lined with years and eyes sharper than a hawk's. They came in without asking. "It's time," May said. "She's ready." "No, she's early," David replied. "She's ready," May repeated, unrolling a stained canvas with practiced hands. "You keep watch. Let us do our part." Lottie clung to David's leg as the women moved like a practiced storm, filling the kettle, placing cloths in bowls, preparing the cot. Birch curled near the hearth, whimpering low. Josephine breathed deep as another contraction passed. Her face stayed calm, but her knuckles turned white. Outside, the wind shifted. The trees swayed like prayers. When David stepped out to the porch, the men were closer. Their voices could be heard now, laughing, jeering. One of them called out, "You given birth to stolen property in there, Thorne?" David didn't answer. Another voice, louder, meaner, "We got papers. Blood don't lie." David stepped off the porch and walked forward, slow, measured. He stopped near the fence, his hat low over his brow, the rifle resting against his shoulder, not aimed, not raised. "Just present. She's not yours," he said. "And you won't cross this fence." One of them, tall, sharp-jawed, laughed. "What are you gonna do, boy? Shoot the law?" "I'll shoot the snake that tries to bite what I protect." There was a moment of stillness then. Pure. Cold. The kind that precedes thunder. Back inside, Josephine cried out, not in fear, but from life clawing its way out of her. May spoke low, hands steady, years of midwifing in her veins. Beatrix wiped Josephine's brow. "Almost there," she whispered. Outside, hooves stomped in place. The riders waited, watching, their shadows long against the barn. David didn't move. Then came a crack of thunder, not from the sky, but from the land. One rider fired into the air. Another dismounted and approached the gate. David took a step forward. "Last warning," he said. But the man kept coming. Inside, Josephine gritted her teeth. Her face was red, damp, radiant. Beatrix whispered encouragement. May guided her hands. Lottie sat in the corner, clutching a doll, eyes wide but dry. The baby was almost here. Outside, the rider reached the gate and placed a hand on the top rail. David raised his rifle. "Don't," he said. The rider smirked. "You ain't no sheriff." "No," David said, voice steady, "but I am hers." And he fired. The shot rang out like judgment. It wasn't a kill shot. David had aimed for the hand. The rider screamed, fell back, blood pouring between his fingers. The others charged then, shouting, hooves tearing through the grass. But they hadn't counted on the neighbors. 3 wagons came down the ridge from the north, Miss Beatrix's kin, and 2 more who'd seen what had been happening and decided enough was enough. They weren't lawmen, but they were folk. And folk know when a line's been crossed. The would-be in-laws pulled back, curses flying. One tried to swing wide to flank the house, but Birch came snarling from the woods, teeth bared, old but still loyal. Inside, Josephine pushed with all the strength left in her. The room blurred. She felt herself parting, breaking, but not bleeding. Not like last time. Not like the sorrow of losing. This was different. This was beginning. The baby came in a single, hard cry, a boy, red and full of protest. His voice was small, but strong. Josephine collapsed back into the pillows, eyes open, tears hot on her cheeks. May placed the baby on her chest. He rooted immediately, breath hitching like he wasn't sure yet if the world deserved him. "You did it," Beatrix whispered, brushing Josephine's hair from her brow. Josephine kissed the crown of the baby's head and whispered his name, Hope. Outside, the riders were retreating now, outnumbered, outwilled. One of them shouted threats of court, of judges, of retribution. But David only stared at them, quiet and calm, until they turned tail and galloped off toward whatever dust had made them. He returned to the cabin, face unreadable. Josephine looked up from the cot, the baby against her chest. "They gone?" she asked. "For now," David said. "But next time, it won't be just me out there." Beatrix stepped up behind him. "Town's already heard. The sheriff's with us. That paper won't hold." David knelt beside the bed, his eyes not on the baby, but on her. "You all right?" he asked. Josephine nodded, tears falling now. "I'm tired," she said. "But I'm not broken." He took her hand and kissed the back of it. Lottie crept to the edge of the bed, eyes wide at the sight of her baby brother. "Is he ours?" she asked. Josephine smiled through her tears. "Yes, sweetheart, he's ours." David stood then and reached into his pocket. A string. Nothing more. Just a bit of frayed twine tied in a loop. "I don't have silver or stone," he said. "But I've got this. And a name. And a home." Josephine stared at it. At him. "I don't need more," she whispered. He tied it gently around her finger. It fit like a vow. Days passed. The world calmed. The neighbors repaired the broken fence. Miss Beatrix came by with soup and gossip. Old May left a jar of tincture and a kiss for the baby. David dug a new garden bed, and Josephine sat in the rocking chair on the porch, baby in her arms, Lottie playing with Birch in the tall grass. Evening light filtered through the trees, soft and golden. One night, Josephine found David whittling again by the fire. She watched the shavings fall like tiny feathers. "What are you making now?" she asked. He looked up, eyes warm. "A cradle." She walked to him and knelt beside his chair. "I think I'd like to call this place home," she said softly. He looked at her, hand pausing. "It already is." The baby stirred. Lottie slept, curled at the foot of their bed. Outside, the stars blinked on, shy and gentle. Josephine pressed her forehead to David's. And for the first time in years, her heart didn't fear the dawn. If you've ever been left behind, dear listener, if the world ever told you you were too late, too old, too broken, remember this. Some storms come to wash the soil clean. And from that broken ground, something beautiful grows.